Welcome to Literary Deep Dives and Discussions with me, A.L. Liskey, the author of the Unseen Operative series. Today I am joined by a fellow author, poet, podcaster, blogger, and educator, Hayes Wolfenden. Welcome, Hayes.
Hey, thank you. Nice to see you.
So I've got several questions for you today, especially regarding your writings in the Jack Strong series. But before we get started, kind of introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your author journey.
Yeah, my author journey is a pretty long one, really. I'd say my author journey, in some ways, I'd say it began after I graduated high school. So maybe like a lot of kids out there, you study English in school and they force you to read. And they do force you. They force you to read whatever the culture decides is a great totemic cultural book. And these are good books. They're good books, but they're not really for 14-year-old kids like, Shakespeare, Dickens. And listen, I think these are great authors and great books, but when you're 14, they're not necessarily the best things to get 14-year-olds to read. So I didn't really like stuff like that. I didn't really read, to be honest. Then I graduated and I started reading Stephen King, and I read his book, Salem's Lot, which is still one of my favorite novels, and I've read it twice now. And I felt like it was a book written for me. I don't mean to say, I can relate to the characters. No, nothing like that. I found it interesting. I found the world interesting. I felt like, this is what I want to read about. And so that got me into reading. I went to university. Then I started to discover the classics, like I mentioned, like Shakespeare and Dickens. And as I'm more mature and more educated, you can appreciate them to a greater degree. And about that time, I started writing poetry. I had maybe a traditional kind of entrance into it where I had a girlfriend, wanted to write poems for her, very lovey-dovey, but whatever. I'm still kind of proud of those poems, really. And it just got me into writing poetry, and maybe I was writing like nature poetry after that, and rhyming, and very kind of pseudo-romantic. And I probably continued like that for quite a few years, and then probably the biggest moment in my life, the last, 15, 20 years, is I decided to leave the UK and I went to live in South Korea and then later China to teach. And that's had a big impact upon my writing in two ways. The new experience just flooded into my work, new words, new images, all these things. But then I also studied for a master's degree in creative writing, and I got exposed to better writers, better writing, different ways of thinking, different ways of writing, and not quickly, but slowly it just started to filter into my work. That's had a big impact on my poetry. My poetry collection is called Made in China, which is obviously an allusion to things are made in China, but also I'm made in China. I wasn't born there, but maybe born again, as they say, and felt like as a poet, as a writer, I was definitely born there, and I had a big impact upon my writing. And then you've got the problems there. They're made in China as well, and it's quite socially conscious, really, and focus a lot on city problems and the urban poor, which certainly at that time were very prevalent, at least to me. They were very jarring images. And then about that time, I just got this idea for a book, Jack Strong, which became Jack Strong and the Red Giant. And I was studying for the master's degree, which was in poetry. This was the thing. It was like, well, I've got to do my poetry, but it was a burning desire. I knew I had to write it now, that moment, because if I didn't, I would write it later. It wasn't like, I won't write it. No, I knew I would write it later. But I knew that it would be different because you can't, replicate that desire and enthusiasm. And I think that desire and enthusiasm for writing the book went into the book. At least that's what I felt. And so I just started writing it. I can't remember how often I wrote. I think I probably wrote every day, or I think I was alternating between writing poetry and writing the novel. So it took me quite a while. Most of the time I write a novel and edit it in about a year, but although they're not very long. But I think this one took me 2 or 3 years. It just took me a while, especially with the poetry. I just started doing that and reading more books. I understood and grasped the importance of editing very early. You finish your book, you've got to edit it, and you got to apply yourself to it. I made a bunch of mistakes. I'll hold my hand up there. I finished the book and I sent it out to agents. I almost got accepted by one, but didn't make it in the end. And the thing was, later I went back and I reread it and I cut out 10,000 words. And then I sent it back to agents. No one was interested. If only I'd sent this version then, because people would reply back to you, hey, you've already sent us this book. And if there's one thing for people listening out there, I just get the impression from that, the agents, what they're doing is they're turning down the premise maybe more than the actual writing itself, which I don't agree with. I think that's anti-literature. I get it. That might be pro-publication, pro-publishing. I get that, but maybe it's because I've also studied like an MA in English literature, and I understand like the relationship between language and the books and culture, and it's an important part of who we are. I mean, just think about the hero's journey alone; it's a massive part of Western culture. And if we're turning down books just because it doesn't have a good title, it's not like that title. There's a lot of. You're hearing me now. This has been echoed by other people at the moment. There is something building, I think, where there's something wrong with book publishing right now. The number of books being read is going down, and it's easy to get fixated and blame AI or social media, and I'm sure this does play a role. But I do think the copycat culture of books. I read when I read a book recently by it was a Booker. It was on the Booker Prize.
I think I've heard of it, yes.
Yeah, it was on the list. It wasn't the winner. It was on the list, and I'd heard of it, and it was about I can't remember the name of the author, and it's probably not fair to mention it, but it's on the Booker list, and it's highly regarded. I bought it. I was like, okay, I've always been very dubious when it comes to literary fiction. I've always been, at least modern literary fiction, and I'm always quite skeptical as to its real quality. And I'm like, you know what? I tell you what, this is about space. I'll read it. And there's moments in the book that there's really good writing, really good prose, but it's a flawed book with almost no narrative.
There's a lot of popular books. I know one right now is in America is the Alchemized book, and there's a lot of political things going on there and social movements that are against it. But it's said to be a very good book, and I took a little bit of a look at it, and it's kind of like you're saying, like it was not well written at all, and yet it's considered the top tier.
I don't know. I'll check it out.
I
But
mean, I
yeah,
wouldn't recommend it, but
no, exactly. Listen. I'm trying to be open-minded. I was reading the book, and I like the first few pages. Very beautifully written about space and astronauts circling the Earth, and he would, describing the passage of, the Earth underneath the space station. But I'm not exaggerating. The author does that 30 times.
oh my.
Like, it's so repetitive. It's like a prose poem, and I think it would work better as a prose poem. But you wouldn't make money from doing the prose poem. I know, but it is a prose poem, and it wants to be a prose poem. And there's almost no characterization, and there's no narrative. If I went into space, I'd be, wow, my God, guys, I'm in space. Oh my Lord. The writer makes space the most depressing, boring thing, and I left. It's only a novella. And I finished it, and I just felt empty. I just thought, is this modern literature? Is this the best that we can do? Structurally flawed book that wants to be a prose poem but isn't because it wants to make a bit of money. Now, one of the reasons why it also gets published, I do tend to. I know it might be a bit of a jumping on the bandwagon of privilege and stuff, and I know it's cool. I think these days talk about white privilege, but I don't really believe in that as a totality. But I think sometimes you can be, if you're rich in the UK, if you go to one of the best universities like Cambridge, Oxford, Imperial, you're set. And I think if you're a writer, you'll know all the publishers and you're going to get published. It's almost like a slam dunk. Whereas if you're a working class writer and you don't know the right people, it's just that simple shift in the equation, and it's odds are stacked against you. So I think there's lots of people out there with some great ideas, and maybe even some of them need help. But it's interesting to say like, oh well, I read this indie book and it wasn't this good, or it wasn't that good, and this happened, and yeah, but there's published books like that.
Yeah, like I've been on
So
Facebook group, and there's somebody constantly complaining about every indie author book that I read is just written terribly, and I don't support indie authors. I'd rather read AI, and that started a huge argument. But it's one of those sort of things that it doesn't matter whether you're traditionally published or indie or any of that. There will always be some books with flaws and some without, because we're humans
yeah,
working with material.
I think as well for me as well, if I'm reading an indie book for argument's sake and I see say a spelling mistake, because they happen, it doesn't bother me. And this is why, because I know that the traditionally published author was just the same. It's just the same. But the difference is they've got a team around them. And so I see the traditionally published author. This is where I get into the AI debate. When it's a bit, and to be fair, I've gone more anti-AI these days. Again, I find if you can see my hand, I tend to go back and forth on it and stuff. And I tend to think we should do that. We should always consider our standpoint on it, our viewpoint on it, to be honest. With AI, I don't know. It's yeah, I think it's a very complicated affair. I think you mentioned about that writer. I typically think they're probably looking for attention, and it's
Oh,
a
yes.
great way to get hits. And I see it. And listen, don't get me wrong, and I've done that before. I realized, nah, that's the wrong thing to do. That's just like to get follows or hits or likes by saying something incendiary. I think it's ridiculous, to be honest. Like I say, with AI, I don't know. It's a hard one to kind of decide which is the best way. Like I say, for me, sometimes on you've seen threads at times or Twitter, the way it's presented is, AI versus all authors.
Yeah,
And I
or
don't
all
really think
artists.
it's like that. The traditional authors, they're not writing their books like independently. And I'm not saying it's like, 2020, although some of them are. There is this team effort that comes together to give you this package that may be excellent as well. Not necessarily bad, maybe excellent. Wow. Like things like a good example is cover art. It's wrong to use AI for cover art. The traditionally published author didn't do their own cover art. They paid the publishing company paid about £2,000, $2,000, maybe 10,000 for a top class
Yeah.
agency. They didn't do it themselves. I think sometimes with the indie authors, I think that's where I think they do themselves a little bit of harm. I think that AI has the potential to kind of raise them up a bit. If we could do book covers that are the same quality as traditionally published authors, wow. And fonts and all that, different ballgame.
Yeah,
Traditional
very
publishing is
much.
under a bit more threat. And if we can put it through, editing software that does the same job as a professional, real professional editor, that works for a publishing company, traditional publishing's got a problem, to be honest.
Very
Now, for
much.
some people, these ideas are anathema. They're like, what? And listen, and I get it. I get that the argument, the devil's advocate is like, well, why didn't you get the book AI to write the book for itself? I've got two ideas on that, two responses. I think number one, I think if you write enough and you edit enough and you read a lot, you wouldn't want to. I don't think you'd have the inclination. I'm thinking at the moment of, I'm not thinking, I'm actually doing it right now. Obviously with my podcast, I've interviewed you, I've interviewed other people. I'm in the process of like typing up, writing up my last interview, and I'm writing it as like an embedded interview, and I'll publish it on my blog. And I'm also going to try to find maybe a newspaper or a magazine that might want to publish it. When I was interviewing the guy Curtis, he said, "Oh, you can find an app that'll just do that for you." I'm like,
Yeah,
"Yeah,
I
yeah, I
remember he
could."
said that.
I was like, "Yeah, I could," but like he's not wrong. He's not 100% wrong. And the reason why I didn't do that as well, look, okay, I knew it would help improve my writing. I think to write more is always good. Always look for new, opportunities to write. But I just decided in the end that I think when I interview people, like we are talking now, it's not just the words we speak. You get a feeling for people when you're interviewing them. And if you just send the words, the transcript to a program, an app, to turn into an interview, it won't get that. It will just get the
Yeah.
words. And those are the two reasons why I decided to do it. So far, and it's literally just finished the first draft, and it's on my phone. On my phone, I'm writing it. And I think it's all right. And I'm going to have to edit it down and maybe cut out some things. But that's why I want to do that. I think the other reason about not using AI to write it is I don't think it'd be able to do it. I think writing's a lot more complicated. It could write Alex Rider. I think it could write maybe this might sound cruel. It could probably write Jack Reacher. These are books that I think are very plot driven, and especially when they get repetitive. Like Stephen King says this about he says that a good book, it has to have layers, and it's not just about plot. It's characters, it's language, it's culture. There's
Yes.
a lot of themes. If Alex Rider, I've just read the first book and pure plot, and just it's ludicrous. Anyway,
Just kind of going off that topic, like it's interesting how much technology that we're talking about because I've noticed like when I
mm,
was reading through your book, the Jack Strong series, like there is so much technology in there from the way that you incorporate like the different rooms on the spaceship. Even in healthcare, I don't know if it's properly how to pronounce her name, Valeria, but the way that she can shut off her central nervous system so that she doesn't have pain, like that's intriguing to me. But as I was reading that, and as you're talking about technology now, it brings to my mind kind of a point that I tried to make in my series, which is that technology isn't inherently bad or good, but when taken to extremes, it can either be a virtue or a vice. And I'm just kind of curious, like, is that something that you kind of intended to play with in your own series?
Trying to remember now, because so if everybody out there, I wrote the book like this like 10 years ago. Mostly, no, no, I didn't plan. I planned the book in terms of, as I always plan books, very generally. I need to know the ending. So I don't know if you finished the book, but the ending I had,
Yes, I did.
the bit with the volcanoes that came to me very early on. I only write books where I know the ending, and I need to have that guide, and I just write down a few grammatically incorrect paragraphs, and I started following it. And don't get me wrong, and I changed things. But for things like that, like the technology, I wanted something that was like, at the time in science fiction, there was a lot of like, I get it, clunky, jagged spaceships, that kind of design. What was I going to say? Yeah, no, stuff like that. I just made up. I was writing it, and this is the thing about writing. These kind of things come to you. I'll do this with Valeria. I'm sure there's other influences like the rooms and stuff. I think the magic room thing was definitely influenced by Harry Potter.
I was going to
Uh,
ask.
yeah, for sure. It's one of the best bits about book five, like that kind of the way she uses imagination, the way you can create things and stuff. And I think that's the way we're going down. I do tend to think that. Yeah, I think for me, I like to portray technology as good if it's used incorrectly. It's people that use it incorrectly. So like in my latest book, it's a dystopian fiction, and the world's been effectively destroyed, or mostly destroyed. But it was done by like people, like tech giants that just
Mm,
want to play God, and they've got this ego. And I think it's something that's in our society right now, especially in America, is huge. Like, there's a lot of things I like about Elon Musk. There's a lot of things I don't like. And sometimes you listen and you're like, dude, you're nuts. Like, and it's like, and there's that lack of humility. I think that's maybe what I pick up sometimes,
mm.
and I think it's probably natural. It's natural if you have that much money, if you have that much power, it just all goes to your head. You think you're the king, and so people like that, they do crazy things.
They do.
And if there's no checks and balances,
Yeah, checks and balances. It's interesting that you bring up Elon Musk because I recall the first time I ever came across he was on Threads. Somebody had asked a question whether there was a certain political figure that had inspired a villain in your story, and you had mentioned Elon Musk. And I remember I commented because even though Elon Musk is not in my series, his company Group X did start the foundation to neurochips in my series, and that actually plays a bigger part, kind of what you're describing in your dystopia for my second book. Technology taken too far by those who aren't humble. So I completely match with you on that. It is about that lack of checks and balances, the lack of humility.
it's something that I think, unfortunately, cynically, I think is going to stay with us. I don't think in the next few years, few decades, few hundred years, we're going to solve this problem. I don't know how it will be solved. It will at some point. At some point, I think we will. But what humans are like. We're very jealous people. Sometimes it's hard to. I should try to say something more positive about humanity. I think at the best of the time, the best things about humanity, because sometimes humanity gets a really bad rap. The best things about humanity is they care for others, and they care
Hmm.
for others that are not part of their family group. It's one of the reasons why the human or the humanoid monkeys were able to spread, because I once saw this documentary, and it was about like this little boy, and he was about to get eaten by a tiger. Another family group threw rocks at the tiger. That's what humans do. You protect others that are not necessarily part of your group. You feel the bond. And we're like that with animals. You think about pets, cats and dogs, birds, even animals that are not pets. You think about looking after lions that we can't see. We think it's the right thing for them to have their natural place. And there's no other animal in the animal kingdom does that. They might temporarily look after an animal, like lions have been observed looking after like deer and stuff, but it's not a general thing. It's very, very temporary. I think when I started doing going back to Jack's drawing, I was being very positive about the future as well. I wanted to give a very positive future. I wanted it to be pure imagination. a lot of it. And a lot of the worlds are made up on the spot. And again, like for editing, I'm a big fan of editing. A lot of stuff like worlds and world building, it really is for editing. You get to go back and you go, what's it like? Is the world full? Does it need a little bit more? Is it a bit too much? And you just use the little things is enough to make it better. And yeah, I just want to do that. I think I was being it's interesting, like George Orwell says about every writer has to know where they are politically before they can write. And and if you say you're not interested in politics, that is a political opinion. So
Yep.
he covers all bases. And when I was writing it, I read that what he said afterwards, and I was like, yeah, I was trying to make a point about bullies, and about one of the big themes is bullying, and it's layered, and the idea is, the main character Jack Strong is being bullied, like I was bullied at school. And it's about his reaction to that. And at the start, he's very weak and he doesn't get magically strong. He learns through experience. But then there's all other things where other people are being bullied. Planets and alien races being bullied. And this idea that we have to stand up to them. It's maybe at the time, I'll be honest, it's quite political. I was thinking like, maybe I was influenced a little bit by like that kind of neocon, like kind of attitude for nation building. I think that's what I remember at the time. I was quite conscious of that, like George W. Bush, Tony Blair at the time, and the idea that we should help people or stand up for people rather than ignore. There is people listening to this. That's imperialism. Yeah, I get it. I get it. I'm not saying it's without flaws, I really do, but I always tend to believe that I'd rather the West was like that and trying to help and solve problems. And don't get me wrong, messing it up as well and not doing it right than standing back and letting dictatorships, just take power and kill lots of people. And again, I get it. It's a loaded gun. It's a loaded dice. Totally get that. But that's what I was thinking about at the time. And
Yeah.
this idea that, and maybe it's influenced by, again, because I'm from the UK, we are influenced a lot in the UK by the Second World War still. And I think it's a big part of the culture that I think maybe a lot of outsiders don't realise. And this idea is you always stand up to bullies. You always, it's one of the reasons why I think the UK has been very, anti-Russia and pro-Ukraine, is because we remember collectively how the Second World War started. I think, again, maybe that closeness to the European continent, understanding that what might be a small fire in a faraway continent can soon become an inferno right next to where you are. So there's a lot of that in there. There's a lot of that for sure. I wanted to write a character that was maybe, and again, it was a bit influenced by Harry Potter as well. Probably not in the way it's imagined. I felt like maybe Harry Potter could have been a bit more, maybe a bit more fragile at the start because of his experiences. Because in reality, if you're sleeping in the cupboard under the stairs, and
Yeah.
you've done that for 11 years, you're going to be psychologically harmed by that. And so I wanted something like that where Jack has got the separation between him and his parents. He doesn't know what to do. He doesn't know how to make friends. He's being bullied, quite physically violently at times. So I took him to a new place in the spaceship where he gets this experience and he starts to get stronger. And I love the bit as I'm talking, when Valeria, who's the girl character, female character, when she beats up the school bully. For everyone out
Yes.
there, it's not the real school bully. It is like a computer program. But like for me, when I wrote that, I was like, this is fantastic. And it kind of shows like the relationship dynamic between girl and boys is always flowing back and forth. There's times when Valeria is leading. There's times when he is, and maybe that's a true reflection of our society. I think that's maybe what I was trying to do as well. And I just wanted to write a book that I wanted to read when I was 14. I still think, and this is my gripe, because of course it's not been traditionally published. I still think there's not enough books like that where they're just pure escapism and they just write it for someone who just wants to go in a spaceship or talk to a monster or talk to the fairies and run with it and go with it. It'd be fantastic.
It's always fascinating to me how so many of the books that are on the shelves, they're kind of what I like to call Hallmark movies. Hallmark is a big thing in America, romance, but you can tell the end from the beginning because the storyline is always the same. And that's what I find in a lot of traditionally published books nowadays is it's all predictable, but it's kind of like you're saying, if more people would just let their imagination flow, take it somewhere new instead of rinsing and repeating the same stories, it would be astronomically influential, I think, upon the rising generations because instead of recycling ideas, we would be given more of a lease on creativity. And creativity is, that is what gets us out of poverty. That's what gets us out of the same slump and issues that continue to regurgitate over the centuries.
No, I actually agree. It's one of the reasons why I would like to get on my podcast. I'd like to get an agent
Mm.
and or a publisher where, because hey, I'm open-minded. Like, what is your take on this? This is what people are saying. And like a really good example is where the problem at the moment is. If you want to traditionally publish your book, right, you go to a literary agent's page. You go to any page. They force you to list books that you've read. Most of them I've never read. And listen, I read all the time. I'm reading every day. And a lot of the books I've never heard of,
Mm.
which suggests there is also a problem here with marketing. They force you to say, when you submit your query, you should say which other books it's like that have been published recently. And so, like, you are going to get authors that will just come out with, things that are just absolute copies. But hey, to be fair, it might work and they get published. But another problem with that is, what if you write down, yeah, my biggest influence was Shakespeare and John Keats and the Bible and the X-Files. Whoa, 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 whoa. They're not interested. And
Yeah, how
it's
do they
like,
go
but
with
this
that?
is not only is like Shakespeare obviously really amazing, is that we still write like Shakespeare. Like, and what I mean by that is like bad guys. The bad guys are like Shakespearean bad guys, like Richard III, disfigured, completely evil. So to say that being influenced by Shakespeare is a negative thing for publishing, I think misunderstands
Mm.
how we write. And again, things like Hero's Journey. I mean, there's plenty of plays of Shakespeare with Hero's Journey as well. And I mentioned the X-Files as well because I wrote a book 2 or 3 books ago, and I was influenced by. It was set in America. I was influenced by the X-Files and Twin Peaks.
Mm.
Those were the biggest influences on the book. Beyond, it was about Bigfoot, but this girl in this small town. There's some murders going on, but there's been Bigfoot sightings, and she's looking for Bigfoot. It wasn't influenced by any modern novel. I haven't read a modern novel on Bigfoot. I was just listening to some podcasts, and it was in COVID, and I couldn't travel. I was like, I can't go to America and Canada. I'll tell you what, I'll write a book about America and Canada, and I'll go there every day in my mind. And that's, for anyone out there, that's what I like to do with my books. It's a way for me to visit that place without actually visiting there. And so that I've always been attracted to North America. I've been 6 times, but not for a few years. And so maybe that's why I'm writing about America and Canada more now. I want to go back. But I was just influenced by the X-Files and Twin Peaks, that kind of tone. If you remember the series, it's dark, wooded, cloudy, grey.
Yeah,
And
suspenseful.
so I'm making an agent pitch. Yeah, what are my influences? What do I say? I've just got to say the X-Files and Twin Peaks didn't even get a look. But it's like, yeah, but the X-Files and Twin Peaks are also fantastic. And there's many people that like them, especially Twin Peaks. I find it a bit, it's like, so I'm trying to think what would be the counter argument from a publisher and agent mate. Well, but people aren't interested in that. They are. You haven't talked to them enough.
Yeah, I think
Listen, I had
they
an
go off
agent.
of what sells the most and they just want to keep copying what sells the most.
Yeah, I was actually rejected a while back by it was actually J.K. Rowling's agent or the
Oh,
agent
wow.
company. Yeah, and they gave me feedback. And listen, I always say this: if you get good feedback from an agent, you got to prize it because when they do that, normally they actually say good things about your writing. And
Hmm.
as frustrating as it is, you have to kind of take that as a little kind of jewel or a penny and wear it like around your neck almost,
Yeah.
And they said, yeah, we really like the idea. You're a really good writer. No one's reading science fiction these days. And I was like, what? All the kids are interested in science fiction. They might not be reading it per se, but they're watching it on TV. And the reason they aren't
Mhm.
reading it is because there's no books published about science fiction that are good, so it's not being sold. And it's like this kind of understanding, it's like it drives you insane. I think it's very dangerous to always like just decide that what's popular is popular. I say to a few people, no one knows that they're going to like Oasis until they listen to Oasis. You don't go, I'm looking for a band called Oasis, I'm looking for this sound. You might have this little weird feeling, I want something new. You hear that new sound, could be rap music. Oh my God, what's this? You don't go, oh, what's this? I'm going to switch it off. I know some people do, but that's how new trends start. And I think it's just, I think we have got ourselves, and I do think it's not just about publishing, it's culture. We're just stuck in a rut. And maybe it is to do with like social media, with Instagram, and we just want hits. All we want to do is just, get the hits as quick as possible. And all we're interested in is the number. We're not interested in content. And I think it's something I've learned from doing my podcast. I do Instagram. Sometimes you ask, why am I not getting more, more readers, more views, more listeners?
Mhm.
Sometimes you have to look at the content. Sometimes you have to go back and go, can I just do little tweaks here and there? And a lot of the time you can. And, like I say, I think the publishing world at the moment, it's not broken, but I think it is a bit dysfunctional. And I think it's, like I said, I think some groups find it easy to get access to it, and other groups, you're more likely to get knocked over crossing the road than get
Yeah,
published,
I
being honest.
agree. Especially on genre. Romance sells like crazy. My mother-in-law is a New York bestselling author and she writes romance. So when I'm associated with her, people assume you write romance and I don't. And I'm
Right.
not half as successful because mystery isn't half as popular, just as sci-fi isn't half as popular. And in my opinion, like that's a big loss to society because there's so much more depth in other genres that are more relevantly depicted than romance is. Not that romance is always unrealistic, but I mean, there's a lot more ethical concerns there comparative to other genres. So it's
Yeah,
fascinating
I
to me
mean,
how they always trump it all.
I read a book, I won't say recently, it was a few years ago, and it was one of these, like, it was, I didn't realize at the time, it was one of the first, like, romantasy. And,
Mm,
romantasy is a very big thing right now. And I
yes.
think it was the first half of the book was really good. Really good world, great world building, interesting characters, good plot, lots of suspense. I'm listening, I'm reading, I'm like, I'm hooked. Wow. I think I'd even started recommending it to people. And then halfway through it fell off a cliff.
Oh,
Why? Just romance. The second half of the book is just, oh, I really love him. Him, I really love, oh my God. If I say pages and pages, we're talking a couple of hundred pages. And it's just like, I don't want to read any more of this. This is like, it was about like, I think it was about angels and different angels, all this kind of stuff. And it was so interesting. The world was really good. And, less is more.
less
It
is
really
more.
is. Show, don't tell. Less is more. Try to stick by those as much as you can.
Mm,
But yeah, with
that's solid
romance,
advice.
I get it. I get it. But, I'm going to read Pride and Prejudice soon, which of course is a romance. It started all romance. But I don't think Mr. Darcy, and I can't remember the name of the main character, I went, oh my God, I love you so much for 300 pages.
Yeah, no, they're
It's,
not.
you've got to balance it and you've got to do different things. But listen, I get it. I get it. If people read romance, I haven't got a problem. Great. If you're a writer that writes it and they sell really well, oh yeah, fantastic. Yeah, good for you. But at the same time, that doesn't mean all the readers want to read romance or westerns or romantasy
Hmm.
or even like young adult. I write young adult fiction. Young adult fiction, it sometimes suffers from trends within the genre.
Mm.
Like when J.K. Rowling was at her height, it was all like young adult magic fantasy. There was other authors, and some of them were very, very good, that were writing really well. And then it shifted to like Twilight-esque, if you remember, and then Twilight vamp it was
Yeah.
all vampires. And then it
Vampires.
shifted again, and then it was dystopia. It was like Hunger Games and the Maze Runner, and then there was like the John Green-esque book, two
Mm.
kids in love with cancer, love fall in love, blah 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 blah. And there's still a bit of that around. And so when you're writing something that's not like that, I feel there's no chance. And I don't like that about young adult literature. I don't like any literature. I still think that, oh, that's a good idea. Oh, you write well as well. I think that's important to write well.
Mm.
Oh, you're a committed writer. If I work with you, I could be working with you for 10 years. Because if you're an agent and you're working with an author, I think ideally it's going to be a long time. You want to work with someone that's maybe nice, but can listen to feedback, will work hard, maybe is used to writing or publishing books. I personally, and again, I'm not an agent and I'm not a publisher. I maybe it's because I'm a writer and I've been writing a while. I think that's a lot better than finding one book that might sell well. Then you get. I can think as I'm talking about, I can think of examples like James Dashner, like Maze Runner, where Maze Runner sells really well. After that, there's not so much, but best to him. But I do think sometimes maybe put the author over the book. Really, I don't know. Maybe that's one of the reasons why for my podcast I try to, if I promote anything, I try to promote myself a bit, not in an egotistical way, just to try to say it's what I do. I'm
Mm.
getting myself out there. I'm getting into. I keep every week that goes by. I think it's simple just doing a podcast, and it's taking me into these other areas. Like Instagram videos came directly from that. Thinking about going on Twitter or Threads, and think about doing these interviews where I'm going to write them up. I'm like, can I get it into a newspaper? I don't know. I'm going to have to research that. That's going to be a tough one. But
Yeah, but
you never know
you're
where it takes
definitely
you,
more
really, do you?
committed, and I'm impressed by how committed you are to not just the process, but to really showing like who you are as an author. One of the questions I was going to ask you is, what does an author mean to you? And just the way that you describe it, it's not just somebody who simply writes. It's somebody who does much more. You're committed. You're invested. You put a lot of heart and soul into
Yeah.
this. You put a lot of experience into this.
I think that's a fair point. I think because listen, I've heard interviews with other. They're not authors. They write some books, and what I mean is, and if anyone's listening, what is the difference? I think an author, whether and this is author, this can be a poet as well. You're writing all the time. And I don't mean like every day. I mean you're writing a book. You're writing poems regularly, shall we say? And we can define what do we mean by regularly. It could be three or four times a week, or it could be a good. Because especially with poetry, I get it that it's more inspiration led. I really get that, and you might have an idea once every 2 weeks, but. And you engage with what you're doing. You're doing talks. You're doing this. You're reading as well. I think I'm very wary of authors that will publish a book, and it's typically like a business type book. And I listened to this interview, and he said, "Yeah, I'm going to write a book. I haven't written one in 6 years." And I'm like, "Dude, that's not writing. That's part of your business. It's like that's a project. You're projecting, and guess what? They sell really well. When you die, and I want to say you go to heaven, and you get to the writers' club." In heaven, and Shakespeare's at the door. That doesn't get you in. I think you've got to. It's about this. You've got to commit to the project. I'm not sure if you've read Hemingway's memoir. It's a writing memoir called A
I've
Movable
always wanted
Feast.
to.
I want to reread it. It's really good because it's about his life in Paris before he got famous.
Hmm.
And don't get me wrong, he's recollecting it, but it's so well written. And it's just he goes on about this over and over. But it's the commitment to the project. But writing is hard. He'll say it sometimes on a good day. I can only get one paragraph written, and he doesn't mean like a typical two-page paragraph that Hemingway might write. He means four, five, six sentences, and that's the best he can do. And it's this idea that writing. Like, yes, it should be a lot of fun, but it can be hard. Sometimes you hit forks in the road. How do I get out of this? I've got to think of a new. Sometimes for me, it's like I wrote a book, the book I just finished, and I finished it, and within like a week or two, I'm like, I think I've made a mistake with that antagonist. I
Mm.
think I've made a mistake. He's not a robot. He has to be a real person. And so I had to go, you know what, I'm going to leave it for now. But when I go back, I've got to edit it, and I got to change these things. I don't want to because that's hard. But kind of quoting JFK, we do these things. We go to the moon because it's hard, because it's a challenge. It makes us better as a nation. It's saying with authors for me, if you do things that are a little bit out of the zone, it makes us better writers. And I'll bring that into publishing companies. If you take on books or authors that are maybe not in vogue right now, maybe it will be a surprise you and they'll be a successful. Maybe it won't. Maybe you have to wait a bit of time. I've got an example in my mind now, REM, the American rock band. In the 80s, they're a minor band. They're not selling well, but the record could, because in those days, they were selling a lot more records. They could keep bands around like that. And then one day they released, I forgot the name of the album now. It might have been Green, or the one with the Shiny Happy People. Huge success. But it's like 5, 6 albums in the making. Jordan Peterson says it takes 10 years to be an overnight success. And I think that we need to remember that. Even with this new way of thinking, writers are still going to get turned down. That doesn't mean we're all going to get accepted. But I do think there should be just a bit more acceptance that there's the young adult. How many people read young adult fiction all around the world? We're talking millions, we're talking tens of millions in different countries, obviously, different genders, different sexualities. They don't all need to read the same type of book
Hmm.
across any 3 or 4 year period. When you think about it like that, it's ridiculous to think that we're just going to put out one type of book every 3 or 4 years, and then the zeitgeist resets or changes. We're only going to do the next 3 or 4. To me, it's just ridiculous. I'd be I think it'd be very hard for me to be convinced that the current method of publishing and choosing books is the correct way. The more I've seen it, and again, I mentioned the agent pages. Every time you go to look for agents, the same thing.
Before I wrote fiction, I've written two nonfiction books. One is self-published. The other, I sent three queries out to some major industries that publish theology books, and I did get responses back from all of them, thankfully. But one of them, like all of their pages, did have like compare yourself to these authors. Where do you fall along these lines? And I said none of them, and so yeah, I was rejected, and that book will not be published. But it is like you're saying, like how can we ever have what people actually want to read if we don't even give them that opportunity? Without opportunity, there is not really a choice. Um, but just before we end up closing, I'm super intrigued. You've lived in different countries. I've lived in different countries as well. So I'm really curious how living in another culture has influenced you as a writer.
Massively. Like, if I'd have stayed in the UK, I wouldn't have written Jack Strong. I wouldn't have written I wouldn't have anything. I'd have written things, but it just wouldn't have been as good. For my poetry, I write expressly about China. What does that mean? I see someone on the street, I write a poem about them. Something affects me in the environment, I write a poem about it. For my novels, it's not quite like that. It kind of filters through the experience of maybe having hardship, getting over hardship, goes into the books. When I first came to China, I hated it. It was just like, whoa, just massive, like a tidal wave of confusion. But I try to put things like that in the novels these days. And like again, my latest book, which is it's like young adult dystopian fiction, it's set initially in Manhattan, and I was imagining a world where you've got all these like super beasts around, all these like giant snakes and giant mammals, and I got the idea because I'm living in Chengdu, and I've read about 2,000 years ago there used to be elephants here, elephants in Chengdu, in this huge metropolis. And I was like, what would happen if all the humans disappeared, like instantaneously? What would happen to the animals? How quickly would Chengdu, because Chengdu used to be a swamp, like, for example,
Mm.
like Washington, D.C. How soon would all that come back? And I think it's probably sooner than we think. And that started the ball rolling. It made me think about having this world set a few hundred, but in fact, the time isn't really set. It's supposed to be like that. Have this world a few hundred years hence where you've got these mega beasts running around, and that was the link for me. I think for Jack Strong, maybe the space aspect is like maybe that's I felt like at times when I went to live in Korea, when I went to live in China, I felt like I was on the dark side of the moon. Like the first time I went to Korea, I'm like, oh my God. Just, I can get culture shock. Very, what's the word I'm looking for? Almost like in a very sharp sense for just a very finite amount of time. One night, first day, then it's gone. I can freak out a bit, and it's something that I've learned about and tried to deal with. And so maybe that's in the fiction, in the settings, especially in space. Really, I think so. Yeah, for me, it's massive. I recommend to anyone out there, if you can travel, if you can live in another country, do it. But I also understand that not everyone can do that for a variety of reasons. And then what I say is, well, try to step out of not necessarily your comfort zone, but almost like your usual zone. If you walk into town, say every Saturday down a certain road, why don't you try going another way? Just something as simple as that. Why don't you try? This is what I did in the summer in the UK. This is in the UK, my experience. I was waking up really early in the morning because of my school. I'm just getting used to the habit of waking up early. And my wife and my kid, they're sleeping in a bit late. What do I do? I was like, yeah, do you know what? There is a woodland down here that I've not been to before. I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll go and walk through there 7 in the morning. And you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go quiet. Who knows? Maybe I'll see something. I was seeing deer. And I was like, what? We've got all these deer around us. I was like, amazing. And I wrote a poem about it. And that's just in my local area. So again, maybe there's places you already are going to. Why don't you try and go at a different time? And there's one thing, because I don't live in the UK now, one thing I'd like to do is I'd love to go out when it's dark or when it's
Mm.
twilight, and just look for animals. Maybe hear, maybe listen. I'm not going to get murdered. I think
Yeah, please
it was in
don't.
my 20s. I think I was afraid of like, you're like, oh, there's a serial killer on the loose. Obviously, there's not. But like, I bet I'd see deer. I bet I'd see foxes. I bet it would be so interesting. And these days, I'm really into what I call safari. And for most people, if you say safari, oh yeah, you mean Africa and you mean the lions. And I know, I think safari, and maybe you can do a human safari. Just go outside your house and just open your eyes and take some notes, take some photos, and you'll come back better for it. Whether that's richer as a human being or richer as a writer, and with ideas. And sometimes experience it can have a dramatic impact on you, but it doesn't necessarily lead to you writing about something there and then. But later it comes to you, or you write something, you think, do you know what? I wrote that because this happened to me or that happened to me. And going back to what I said earlier about AI, that's why I think AI won't be able to write a really good book.
Hmm.
Because when we write, it's not just language. We've got the conscious mind, subconscious mind, hopes and fears. I think that's a very human thing. Then you write a lot about dreams. If AI can't dream, could they write the same? I doubt it,
They actually can't. I've
And
tried
that's,
that. I
yeah,
asked ChatGPT one time, how would you describe a dream sequence if this is your subject matter? Because I wanted to see if I could do better than it.
okay.
And it'll say, okay, I will describe this in a subconscious, eerie style. And it spouts out this rustic nonsense that reads just like some basic like sixth grader has just typed up the very first thing that came to their head. And there's nothing imaginative about it. Actually, the sixth grader would do much better. And this chat GPT just, it wasn't quite right. And you're quite right that it lacks that background experience. It can't have
Yeah.
memories. It can't have feelings. It's, in artificial intelligence's eyes, whoever's using it is always right.
Yeah, George Orwell says that like when we talk to each other, we're using our conscious minds, but when we're writing, it's the subconscious.
Mm-hmm.
And if an AI doesn't have subconscious, therefore it's just using a conscious mind, it would be very superficial writing. Even the most advanced, I think it would be very superficial. I don't think it would be able to have the nuances that a lot of the time we aren't aware of ourselves.
Mm.
So yeah,
Yeah.
that's what I think about AI and the writing process and publishing. I think I've covered a few bases. So yeah, if anybody out there wants to read my books, Jack Strong, they're all available on Amazon. My poetry collection is called Made in China. You can listen to my podcast, What the Haze, but I don't mind. I don't mind. I'm pretty easygoing and all this, to be honest.
But I would encourage all our listeners definitely check out Hayes's channel. He posts wonderful things, especially on his socials. Great advice about writing. You've always put great advice about writing, and a lot
Thank
of
you.
it I found that I follow even before you say it. But I'm like, yeah, he's right. He's just you put to words how it should be.
Yeah, I try to. Yeah, most writing advice is really very general. Is you got to write, you got to read, you got to edit. I
Mhm.
think if you're doing those three things, there's a lot of argument about how much you write, how much you edit, how much you read. I get all that. Don't get me wrong, I get all that. But I think you've got to do those three, and I think if you're not doing one of those three, it just isn't going to work in the long term. To be honest, even as an indie writer, it just won't work in the long term. I just think that they balance each other out, being honest.
Precisely. It's an art.
You
Being an
know,
artist or being an author is an art. It's an ongoing skill, like you described. It's not something that you just do once in a while or once in a
true,
lifetime.
true.
It's continual and having that ongoing process because it's kind of like walking. We don't always walk at the same speed to the same places. It's a different pace, and so that's what it is. You need to switch between editing, writing, reading, get all of those different type of author nutrients in you to keep that passion fueled and the art growing.
Yeah, I totally agree, completely agree, 100%.
Well, it's been a wonderful discussion having you here with us, Hayes. I really do appreciate your time, and you have just shared some incredible things. So I'm very excited for
Yeah,
listeners to get this and to be more introduced to you.
yeah, and I'll share it on my stuff as well. Not a problem. Loving it.
Excellent. Well, that will be our wrap for today, and I thank all the listeners for popping in. Again, check out Hayes, subscribe to our channel, subscribe to his channel, and definitely leave a comment for anything in this discussion that you found enlightening or have questions on.